On a bitterly cold night in Chicago, the kind that turned the streets into sheets of ice and wrapped the city in a heavy silence, Elena Carter hurried through the doors of Benson's Cafe. The tiny diner, tucked between a pawn shop and a boarded-up bookstore, was her lifeline, both a job and a fragile bridge to something bigger. At 27, she wasn't just another waitress balancing trays of greasy burgers and overfilled coffee cups, she was a dreamer. A painter at heart. Every tip she pocketed was a step closer to escaping the suffocating grip of minimum wage, toward an art studio she could barely afford to dream about. Inside, the air buzzed with the usual rhythm, clinking silverware, muffled conversations, the hiss of a coffee machine that never quite worked right. Elena had memorized the faces of the regulars, the exhausted nurses from the nearby hospital, the truckers who came in for all-night coffee refills, the office workers escaping their cubicles for a late dinner. But that night, as the door swung open, bringing a blast of icy wind with it, the diner's hum stuttered. Liam, a frail man wrapped in a coat so thin it looked like it belonged to another life, stood hesitantly at the entrance. His hollow eyes darted around the room, shoulders hunched as if bracing for the rejection that was surely coming. The other customers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to notice. Elena did notice. Her heart clenched as she took in his trembling hands, the way he hugged himself against the cold. Without thinking, she stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Sir, are you hungry?" He barely nodded, his cracked lips parting to whisper, "3 days. Rules be damned." Tonight, she wasn't just a waitress. She was human. And she wasn't about to let him starve. Elena didn't hesitate. She led Liam to a small booth near the back, away from the prying eyes and judgmental whispers, and slipped into the kitchen before anyone could stop her. A minute later, she placed a steaming plate in front of him, *** meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans ***. Simple, but warm. Real food, food that could save someone from feeling invisible for just one night. "Eat," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Don't worry about it." For a moment, Liam just stared at the plate, as if he couldn't believe it was real. Then his hands, still shaking from the cold, gripped the fork like a lifeline. His first bite was hesitant, almost cautious, but as the warmth of the food spread through him, his expression crumbled. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Thank you," he croaked, his voice raw and broken. Elena felt a rare sense of pride swell in her chest. This was who she was, someone who did the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. But the moment shattered in an instant. A sharp voice cut through the hum of the diner like a blade. "Elena." She froze. The air around her seemed to thin as Richard Hale, the cafe's wiry, sharp-faced manager, stormed out from behind the counter. His slicked-back hair glistened under the diner's harsh fluorescent lights, his beady eyes filled with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He snapped, his voice loud enough to make the other customers fall silent. Elena's heart pounded, but she didn't back down. "He was starving, Mr. Hale. I couldn't just, ***. This isn't a damn soup kitchen." Richard's face twisted in a sneer. "You don't get to play Mother Teresa with my food." "It's just one meal," she argued, standing her ground. "I'll cover it." Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice into a menacing hiss. "With what, your pathetic tips?" He jabbed a finger toward Liam, who shrank into his seat. "We don't do handouts. Especially not for people like him." Elena's cheeks burned with fury. She clenched her fists at her sides. "He's not people like him. He's a person." Richard's lips curled into a cruel smirk. "You're not sorry. Fine. You're done here. Clean out your locker and get out." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Fired. For showing compassion. For being human. As the weight of it sank in, Elena yanked off her apron, her fingers trembling. The other employees avoided her gaze as she grabbed her coat and walked toward the door, every step heavier than the last. Outside, the Chicago winter hit her like a slap, icy wind cutting through her thin jacket, snow falling in thick, merciless waves. She sank onto a bench across the street, staring numbly at the diner's glowing sign. Her mind spun. Rent was due in a week. She had no backup plan, asterisk asterisk. And tomorrow? Liam would still be out there. Still hungry. Hashtag the aftermath and the internet's wrath. Elena sat on the cold bench across the street, her breath coming in uneven puffs of white against the dark Chicago sky. Snowflakes landed in her hair, melting instantly as the weight of what had just happened pressed down on her chest. Fired, just like that. For what? For giving a man a meal. For showing a shred of decency in a world that had long forgotten people like Liam. Her fingers curled around the strap of her bag, knuckles white. She should have fought harder. She should have screamed in Richard's smug face, asterisk asterisk, but what would it have changed? The man had already made up his mind. Inside the diner, the neon lights still buzzed, mocking her with their steady glow. Life went on without her. The other employees had turned away, too scared or too indifferent to stand up for her. But what stung the most was that Liam had apologized. He had thought this was his fault. Elena let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. No. This was on Richard Hale, asterisk asterisk. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the moment she stepped out into the snow, the real battle had already begun. At the counter, one of the regulars, a burly man named Mike, had been watching the whole scene unfold. He was a guy who didn't say much, the type who nursed his coffee for hours without ever asking for a refill. But tonight, something in him snapped. He pulled out his phone. His fingers flew over the screen as he typed. Just watched a waitress get fired at Benson's cafe for feeding a homeless man. Manager's a total piece of trash. Hashtag justice for Elena. He hit post. And the internet did what it does best. Within minutes, the tweet started to pick up traction. A woman in a red scarf, who had been sitting near the window, added her own post. Benson's cafe just lost the best waitress they had. Elena didn't deserve this. Spread the word. Hashtag stand with Elena, hashtag boycott Benson's. The hashtags multiplied. Retweets soared. The outrage spread like wildfire. By the time Elena had wiped the snow from her lashes and forced herself to stand, her name was already trending. She didn't know it yet, but Richard Hale had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because this wasn't just a firing. This was a movement. Hashtag an unlikely savior walks in. The snow kept falling, thick and relentless, as Elena sat hunched on the frozen bench, staring at the diner's glowing sign like it held the answers to what the hell she was supposed to do next. She had no job, no backup plan, and in a few days, no way to pay rent. Her roommate, Mia, was going to flip. What had she even accomplished? Liam had eaten one meal. And now he was back out there, lost to the night, while she was left with nothing. Elena buried her face in her hands, exhaustion pressing in from all sides. She didn't hear the low rumble of an engine as a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop in front of Benson's cafe. She didn't see the door open or the figure step out, shaking the snow from his dark hair. Not until a deep, steady voice cut through the cold. Elena Carter. Her head jerked up, heart hammering. For a second, she thought she was hallucinating. Keanu Reeves stood in front of her, his breath visible in the icy air, his dark coat dusted with snow. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. His gaze was unreadable, but there was something behind it, something knowing, something deeper than just casual curiosity. He glanced at the diner, then back at her. I heard what happened. Elena let out a breathy, disbelieving laugh. You, what? Keanu reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tilted the screen toward her. The glow of the display illuminated a Twitter feed flooded with her name. Hashtag Justice for Elena was everywhere, posts, comments, thousands of retweets. A firestorm of support. Her stomach twisted. She had no idea this was happening. The internet is a powerful thing, Keanu said, slipping his phone away. But real change? That happens out here. He gestured to the street, to the snow-covered world beyond the screen. So, let's make some. Elena frowned, still trying to process the fact that she was having a conversation with Keanu freaking Reeves in the middle of a Chicago snowstorm. What do you mean? He exhaled, glancing at the SUV. Come with me. There's someone I want you to meet. She hesitated. Everything in her life had just crumbled, and now this? She should be wary. She should ask more questions. But she had nothing left to lose. With a deep breath, she stood, brushing snow from her coat. All right, she said. Let's go. Keanu nodded once, then led her to the waiting SUV. As the car pulled away from Benson's cafe, leaving the neon glow behind, Elena had no idea that she was about to step into a world far bigger than she had ever imagined. Hashtag a door to something bigger. The SUV glided through the snow-covered streets of Chicago, its tires cutting smooth tracks in the fresh powder. Elena sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands tucked under her arms for warmth, stealing glances at Keanu Reeves beside her. The streetlights flickered against the dark glass, reflecting his expression, calm, unreadable, but purposeful. She still couldn't quite believe this was happening. Finally, she cleared her throat. Where exactly are we going? Keanu kept his eyes on the road. You'll see. The car slowed in front of a brick building in a quiet part of the city. The sign above the door read, Horizon Shelter, Rebuilding Lives. The warm glow of lights from inside spilled onto the icy sidewalk, an inviting contrast to the freezing night. Elena frowned. A shelter? Keanu cut the engine and turned toward her. Not just any shelter. A place where people get second chances. He hesitated for a moment, then added, people like me. She blinked. Like, you. Keanu nodded, but before she could press for more, the front doors swung open. A woman in her 40s, with curly dark hair and warm brown eyes, stepped outside, rubbing her hands together against the cold. She smiled when she saw them. This must be Elena. Keanu gave a small nod. Maya Sullivan, meet Elena Carter. Elena, this is Maya, she runs this place. Maya extended a hand, her grip firm and steady. Keanu told me about you. And about what happened tonight. Elena huffed out a breath, shaking her head. Great. So now the whole world knows I got fired. Maya chuckled. Not the whole world. Just the parts that still believe in doing the right thing. She stepped aside, motioning toward the warm interior. Come in. Let's talk. Elena hesitated, the weight of exhaustion pressing on her shoulders. But she was already here. And the warmth spilling out from the door was too tempting to resist. She stepped inside. The lobby was simple but inviting. A Christmas tree, slightly lopsided, stood in the corner with a string of mismatched lights. A few people sat at tables, drinking coffee, playing cards, or simply talking. It was quiet, but alive, not just a shelter, but a place where people found some version of home. Maya led them into a small office cluttered with papers, art supplies, and a half-eaten muffin on the desk. She gestured to the chairs. Sit. Elena sat, rubbing her hands together, suddenly feeling out of place. Keanu says you're an artist, Maya said, leaning forward. Elena scoffed. I want to be. But art school doesn't exactly take tips as tuition. Maya nodded, studying her. And you helped someone tonight, even when it cost you everything. Elena shifted in her seat. I didn't do it to be a hero. That's usually how real heroes start. Maya smiled, then gestured toward the cluttered shelves. We do a lot here: job training, outreach, meal programs. But you know what we don't have? A way for people to express themselves. She paused, then said carefully, what if you started an art class here? Elena blinked. Me? Teach? Maya shrugged. You don't have to decide now. But think about it. Art gives people something to hold on to, something to rebuild with. Maybe this is your second chance, too. Elena's pulse quickened. Teaching? That wasn't part of the plan. Then again, neither was any of this. She felt Keanu watching her, quiet and patient. He wasn't pushing. Just offering a door she hadn't even known was there. After a long moment, she exhaled. I'll think about it. Maya grinned. That's all I ask. Keanu stood, stretching slightly. I'll take you home. Elena followed him back out into the cold, her mind spinning in 100 directions. She had no idea what tomorrow looked like. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like the end. Hashtag truths unraveled. The next morning, Elena stood outside Horizon Shelter, staring at the building as if it held the answers to the chaos still spinning in her head. A fresh layer of snow coated the streets, muffling the city's usual sounds. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She still didn't know why she was here. After last night, she should have been focused on finding another job, fixing her life. Instead, she was back at the place Keanu Reeves had brought her, standing on the edge of something she didn't quite understand. With a deep breath, she pushed open the doors. Inside, the warmth welcomed her instantly, along with the smell of fresh coffee and the faint murmur of conversation. A few people recognized her from the night before, small nods, quiet smiles, but she wasn't ready for their kindness just yet. She found Maya Sullivan in her office, already halfway through a cup of coffee and sorting through a pile of paperwork. Maya looked up. Didn't think I'd see you so soon. Elena hesitated before stepping inside. I figured. I should at least check it out. Maya gestured to the chair across from her. Good. Because I already have people asking about the art class. Elena let out a breathy laugh, shaking her head. You don't waste time, do you? Maya smirked. Nope. Before Elena could say anything else, a familiar voice spoke from the doorway. You made it back. She turned. Keanu stood there, casual as ever, hands in the pockets of his dark coat. Elena crossed her arms. Still not used to seeing you in places like this. Keanu chuckled. I get that a lot. He stepped inside, leaning against the wall. You thinking about staying? She shrugged. I don't know yet. Maya stood, stretching. I'll give you 2 a minute. With that, she slipped out, leaving them alone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elena sighed, finally voicing the question that had been eating at her. Did you set this up? Keanu frowned slightly. What do you mean? All of this. She gestured around the room. James showing up at the diner that night. You walking in right after I got fired. Bringing me here. She shook her head. Was it all planned? Keanu straightened, something flickering behind his eyes. I didn't plan your firing, if that's what you're asking. Elena narrowed her gaze. But you knew James. Silence. Then, finally, Keanu exhaled and nodded. Yeah. I knew him. Elena's stomach tightened. For how long? Keanu hesitated. A long time ago, when I was younger. I was where he is now. She froze. You were homeless? He nodded. For a while. Before the movies, before the fame, before everything. His voice was quiet, but steady. James helped me back then. Gave me food when I had nothing. Looked out for me. I never forgot it. Elena's breath hitched. She hadn't expected this. So when you saw him at the diner, Keanu's jaw tightened. It hit me hard. I didn't walk in there because of Twitter or some trending hashtag. I walked in because I saw James starving in a city that had forgotten him. And I saw you. Standing up for him when no one else would. Elena swallowed hard, her chest tightening with emotions she wasn't sure how to process. Keanu took a slow step forward, holding her gaze. I didn't plan for you to get fired. But once it happened, I saw a way to help. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. So what am I? A charity case? Some kind of redemption project? Keanu shook his head, his expression turning serious. You're not a project, Elena. You're just a good person who got screwed over for doing the right thing. And I had the chance to make sure that didn't break you. She studied him, searching for any sign of dishonesty, but all she found was raw, quiet sincerity. After a long moment, she let out a slow breath. Okay. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Okay. She nodded. I believe you. But no more secrets. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Deal. For the first time since that awful night at Benson's cafe, Elena felt like she had a choice again. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to take it. Hashtag the price of fighting back. The next few weeks felt like a lifetime. Elena threw herself into her new life at Horizon Shelter, trying to ignore the voice in her head whispering that this wasn't permanent, that at any moment, everything could crumble again. She spent her mornings helping with meal programs, her afternoons organizing supply drives, and, despite her doubts, her evenings teaching an art class for the shelter's residents. It started small. A few hesitant faces. People who had forgotten what it was like to hold a pencil without shaking. Liam was one of them. He sat in the back, sketching with slow, careful movements, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. Each rough, jagged line felt like a battle he was winning. And in those moments, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. But even as her world began to stabilize, the past wasn't finished with her. Hashtag the diner crew comes calling. It started with a knock at her apartment door late one evening. She opened it to find Tom, the lanky busboy from Benson's cafe, shivering in the hallway with a group of former co-workers behind him. Elena, we need you. She let them in, confused, as they stomped the snow from their boots and huddled inside. What's going on? She asked, glancing at their worried faces. Tom's expression was tight. Richard Hale is screwing us over worse than ever. Cutting hours. Docking pay. Threatening anyone who even mentions what he did to you. Elena folded her arms. What do you want me to do about it? I don't work there anymore. That's the point. Tom leaned forward, urgency in his voice. You started something. The hashtag Justice for Elena thing. It made people pay attention. But it's fading. If we go public now, hit him with a lawsuit, expose everything, we might actually take him down for good. The words hit like a gut punch. Elena had spent weeks trying to move forward. Was she really ready to look back? Hashtag the storm before the break. She didn't have time to decide. The very next day, while helping at Horizon, Mia stormed into the shelter, phone in hand, looking furious. Have you seen this? She demanded, shoving the screen in Elena's face. At first, the words didn't make sense. Then they did. Elena Carter, fraud. Fired for stealing from Benson's cafe, now pretending to help the homeless while pocketing donations. Horizon Shelter is a scam. Don't fall for it. Elena's stomach dropped. The post had gone viral. Thousands of comments. Retweets. Hate, ***, people calling her a con artist, a thief. Saying she was using Keanu Reeves for attention. Saying she was worse than Richard Hale. Her hands shook as she scrolled. Mia's voice was sharp. This is him. It has to be Hale. Elena barely heard her. The panic was setting in. It was happening again. Hashtag the truth comes crashing in. The shelter went into damage control mode, but the damage was spreading faster than they could contain it. Donations slowed. Volunteers second-guessed their work. Some people even stopped coming altogether. Richard Hale had found a way to hit her where it hurt the most. And then, Liam stepped forward, The quiet man who had eaten her kindness in a greasy diner booth weeks ago. The man who had barely spoken in her art classes. The man who, it turned out, had been hiding the biggest secret of all. At a meeting with Horizon's board members, Liam cleared his throat and held up his phone. I have proof. Every head in the room snapped toward him. Liam swallowed hard, then continued, my name isn't just Liam. It's Liam Carter. I'm a journalist. And I've been investigating Hale for months. Hashtag the bombshell. Elena's breath hitched. Journalist? Liam nodded, eyes steady. I've been undercover, tracking cases of wage theft, fraud, and intimidation tactics in businesses like Benson's Cafe. I've got records, witness statements, and financial documents. He turned the phone toward them. There it was. A drafted article, fully written, headline ready. The greed behind the counter, how Richard Hale profited from poverty. Liam looked at Elena. This hit piece against you. It's his last swing. He knows I'm coming for him. The room was silent. Then, without hesitation, Keanu stood from the back of the room and clapped a hand on Liam's shoulder. Post it. Liam nodded. He hit publish. Hashtag the fallout. The internet exploded. Within hours, the truth about Richard Hale was everywhere. His financial records. His payroll schemes. His illegal cuts from employees' checks, ***. He tried to deny it, until reporters caught him sneaking out of Benson's Cafe in the middle of the night, a duffel bag in hand. Running. By morning, Benson's Cafe was shut down, its windows papered over, its locks changed. Richard Hale. Gone. And Elena? For the first time in weeks, she wasn't the one on trial. Hashtag a new beginning. The storm had passed. Elena didn't go back to waitressing. She didn't need to. The art exhibition at Horizon Shelter, once at risk of falling apart, now had more support than ever, donations flooded in. Galleries took interest. And then, the unthinkable happened. An investor offered Elena a space. Not a handout. Not charity. A real opportunity. A place in Chicago's art district, where she could open a studio, not just for herself, but for artists like the ones she had been teaching. People who needed a place to create, to rebuild, to heal. It wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone she had fought for. Hashtag one final note. At the opening of Carter Studios, people came and went, admiring the art, shaking hands. Elena barely had time to breathe before Keanu stopped by, handing her a folded note. He didn't stay. Just smiled, squeezed her shoulder, and disappeared into the crowd. Elena unfolded the paper. The handwriting wasn't his. Elena, you gave me a meal, but you gave me something bigger, too. You gave me a purpose again. I owed Keanu a debt, and helping you paid it. This wasn't him. This was me, asterisk asterisk. Keep shining.